Thank you, Vivian, for that intro. So just a bit about me. My name is Sarah Omoike. Speaking all the way from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm super excited to be here. I'm a software engineer and also product designer. I co-lead Lagos Women in Machine Learning and Data Science. Vivian did a bit of intro on what my community is about. So a few contents of what I'll be talking on is overview on accessibility, how to build products for all, basically. Tools to test accessibility compliance after, possibly after building your products. How do you know if they have there's accessibility compliance in your products or applications that you build? So the first question is, what is accessibility? I want to do an intro on what the term accessibility is. Lately, in the past few years, it's been a really major concern in terms of lots of companies having to consider if their products are actually accessible to users or not. So it covers a larger range of users. So accessibility is the practice of basically making your website usable by as many people as possible. We traditionally think of this as being about people with disabilities, but the truth is the practice of making sites accessible also benefits other groups, such as those using mobile devices or those with slow network connections. What this means is, so accessibility is actually termed with disabled people per se, but I think that it has to be a general. It has to cover a general concept of if your application or product or software application is actually usable by people. But we'll basically look at people that have several or different impairments as regards visual impairments or hearing impairments or cognitive impairments. So I talked about what accessibility is. So you might also think of accessibility as treating everyone the same and giving them equal opportunities, no matter what their ability or circumstances are or is. Just as it is wrong to exclude someone from a physical building because they are in a wheelchair. Modern public buildings generally have wheelchair ramps or elevators. That's one way of considering people with or putting in accessibility considerations in products or projects or applications, but in this case in buildings. So it is also not right to exclude someone from a website because they have a visual impairment. We are all different, but we are all human and therefore have the same human rights. Accessibility is the right thing to do. Providing accessible sites is part of the law in some countries. Yeah, there are some fines or you get to pay some fines if your sites are not accessible. I think in the US they do that, yes. So which can open up some significant markets that otherwise would not be able to use your services or buy your products. Take for instance, you build a product or you build a software application and you don't put in accessibility considerations into it. You just build these products for yourself in assumptions. That's what most companies do. You don't consider a larger percentage of people that have several issues as regards health or whatever the case may be. So in the case where, so I'm going to share some sort of statistics on people with several disabilities as regards numbers I got from the World Health Organization. So let's assume, say, over 1 billion people have some sort of impairments, and then you build your products and you exclude these category of people not to use your application. Imagine if you actually include them or consider them when you are building your products or your software applications. It gives you an opportunity to cover a wider range of users, which on the long run brings revenue or income to your products or your company. So accessibility is also denoted as A11Y. It's this in the middle stems from conventions in software engineering and ICT that shortens long words from substituting middle letters with the number of middle letters. So look at the word, have in between A and Y, you have 11 letters in between. So the 11 actually represents the 11 characters, sorry, in between the A and Y alphabet. So that's the meaning of, I'm sure, so previously I actually did not know what A11Y is, pronounced like do. So that's the meaning of A11Y. So in summary, accessibility is the practice of making your website usable, like I said earlier, as for usable by as many people as possible. We traditionally think of this as being about people with disabilities, but the practice of making your site accessible is very key. Yeah, and also benefits other groups, such as those using mobile devices or those with slow network connection. So I'll be during my slides, I'll be showing different ways or best practices where you could incorporate accessibility considerations in your applications when you're building them. So like I said, you are not your users. So a lot of companies actually just build products without usability testing, and this is where the role of researchers, user experience, user experience, UI UX per se comes in, or where usability testers comes in. I think there's a new job designation of accessibility engineers, where these people actually they have the role of ensuring that there is quality control and quality assurance in terms of incorporating accessibility considerations in your applications. So people with disabilities are just as diverse as people without disabilities, and so are their disabilities. It is essential to think beyond your own computer and how you use the web, and start learning about how others use it. Basically, you are not your users. People use special tools to access web content. These special tools are known as assistive technologies. So how do you build apps, software products that everyone can use? In different categories, people navigate and find content using different strategies and approaches depending on their preferences, skills, and abilities. For instance, someone using a website for the first time may need clearance or guidance than someone who has more experience with a particular site. And someone using the web on a mobile device with a small screen may require more orientational cues than someone using a desktop computer. While these typical usability are with or without disabilities, some situations disabilities to a greater extent. So it's best for us as developers or designers or product owners or CEOs or CTOs to think beyond just the computer and think in regards to how users will use our applications. So my first consideration is looking at people with visual impairments. So these people are categorized as people with blindness, low-level vision, color blindness. Many people with visual impairments use screen magnifiers that are either physically magnifiers or software zoom capabilities. Most browsers and operating systems these days have zoom capabilities, which is quite cool. Some users actually rely on screen readers. So I think when I started out as a software engineer, I actually did not have any idea that these accessibility considerations is a very key thing to consider when building applications. So looking at considering how people that have visual impairments use the application. So it's very key for us to have incorporate best practices. For instance, so these categories of people use screen readers to read or access our applications. So if the products or software we are building doesn't have a support for screen readers, it's going to be not a good product or software applications for them to use, which will, on the long run, turn on the conversion rate. Yeah. Browser these have Zoom capabilities. Rely on screen readers. So some screen reader examples are, so you have Chromebooks, NVDA, there are a whole lot of them, but I think on the previous session with, I've forgotten her name, she actually showed a bit of practical examples of how to use the Chrome Dev tools to check if your application is actually covering these categories of people. So a statistical representation of people who are actually in these categories from the WHO data, there are about 285 million people that are estimated to be visually impaired. So assuming you build a product that you don't build applications with this category of people in mind, and then exclude 285 million people from not using your application, that's like a whole lot of exclusion there. Imagine if they are using your application, it goes a long way, it covers a wider and better range of users. So this is actually a large and significant population of users to miss out, honestly, because your site is not accessibly considerable. Let me use that in English, sorry. So almost the same size of this, actually almost the same size of the US population. So there's also a category of people with hearing impairments, also known as auditory impairments or deaf people. They also have low hearing levels, or they don't hear at all. So it's also best to as I go on, I'm going to show how to actually incorporate these considerations in your application so that you actually build products that cover this category of people. So they have like from WHO statistics, you have like 466 million people worldwide having disabling hearing loss. So imagine you don't have, or you don't build products that cover these categories of people, cover these scenarios. Let me use that word. So there are, however, there are specific techniques for providing textual alternatives to audio content, which range from simple text transcripts, text tracks, that's caption that can be displayed along with video. So hearing impaired people also represent a significant user base. So there's also people with mobility impairments. That's basically people that can't move around. Why I'm doing this, why I'm taking time to break this down is for us to see that we actually, if we don't have accessibility considerations if we don't consider building applications for everybody in mind, these are the number of people based on statistics that are actually leaving out that won't be able to use our applications, or will find it really difficult to use our applications. So the way this usually affects how we build or design software solution is a requirement that controls accessibility. Requirement that controls can be accessible by using the keyboard, but it's a good idea to try out some website. That's if you want to. So there are some websites there are some major websites. People are actually putting a lot of these things into considerations and ensuring that these categories of people are actually put into considerations when they are building applications. So there's also people with cognitive impairment. Refers to a broad range of disabilities, from people with intellectual disabilities who have the most limited capabilities. So I wouldn't want to go into the health perspective of that. So I'm just going to not talk so much on that. So in total, from the World Health Organization statistics, you have about 15% of the world population. So about live with some form of disability, of which 2 to 4% experience significant difficulties in functioning. So this amounts to about 1 billion people, or 15% of 50% of the world population. So accessibility, building, incorporating accessibility, or ensuring that your application or product, software application or products is accessible, is actually the right thing to do. Providing accessible sites, providing accessible application is actually a core thing to do in as regards software. It's so important. We as software engineers or designers or product owners actually consider these aspects to be core of our process, because like I said earlier, if you leave this out, you're leaving a very wide or larger population of people out of it from using your products. So the question is, how do we actually build for everyone? As developers, designers, and engineers, as product owners, CTOs, CEOs, how do we do that? So there are some features or best practices or things to look out for when we are building or writing programs. So or building products here. So one is consistency and predictability. So this refers to actually labeling of functions. So your links, your buttons, your controls should be consistent. Functions should be predictable from the label. So there's also descriptive titles, headings, and labels. So initially, before I got knowledge of actually having to incorporate building products for everybody, I think I was doing one very wrong thing of using. So rather than having to use your div tags to add headings to your paragraphs or your sites, or maybe you're trying to describe a particular page, is best practice. It's actually best to use the H1, either of the H1 to H6 tag for headings. That's one key best practice of incorporating accessibility considerations in your application. So page titles, section headings, and labels for forms, links, controls are sometimes read on their own or out of context and need to be very descriptive. So there's also visual orientation, a helpful error and success message, also dialogues and other messages, such as submitting forms need to help users complete their tasks and avoid disorientation, distraction, confusion, and discomfort. That comes in with ensuring that if you're building, let's say you have a form, for instance, and user is meant to input data or whatever, and it's incorrect. So at the point of telling the user that whatever you're inputting is not correct, it's best that we ensure that those messages are descriptive as much as possible. I think I have like a best practice or a best way to actually display those messages so that it doesn't come in or show up as confused, or the user doesn't get confused as to, okay, what's happening here? What should I do next? What was the error? What actually happened while I was filling the form? Multiple navigation mechanism. Website needs to provide multiple ways to locate web pages. For example, by providing sitemaps and search functionality in addition to hierarchical navigation menus. Yeah, so that's another way to ensure that everybody gets to use your application with ease. Yeah. So there's also mechanisms to allow keyboard users to skip over repetitive blocks of content, such as page headings, navigation bars, or menus. Too many skip links are counterproductive, though. Examples for visual orientation. Examples could be using background colors to indicate different parts of the content, using unique headings, and placing relevant information in prominent areas of a web page. So I talked about I talked about these first three. So there are also a ton of a list, and lots of best practices to follow when building applications or ensuring that your application is accessible to everyone, everyone in the best possible way. So it's best to choose. So, for instance, if you're using maybe you're using a content management system, maybe Drupal or what's this one now? Whatever you're using, they are most of they don't actually support accessibility, or they don't provide in ensuring that the templates actually there are accessibility considerations built into it. So it's best to look out for content management systems. If you're using a content management system, for instance, to build your site or whatever you're using it for, a site, best look out for those ones that have accessibility considerations incorporated in the templates. And so descriptive descriptive titles, headings, and labels. I talked about this before. Page titles, section headings, and labels for forms, links, and controls are sometimes read on their own and out of context. Okay, so I also talked about, so one key thing, include proper alt text for images. So I think I went on some sites some few days ago, and I got confused as to, so the network was a bit bad, and there's actually an image. So I got confused as to what was there. So that's a typical example of not building or not having to consider accessibility in terms of not adding an alt description to an image, because basically considering areas where or users users of your application that don't have good internet connection. So having to have your alt having to have the alt description for the image there could tell the user that, okay, this is an image for Sarah's profile picture, or this is an image for Women Who Code Connect Forward logo. So be descriptive in terms of describing whatever image you're using by adding the alt text for images. Yeah, that's one also. So for links, I'd ensure that if you have a link your web page, add the unique and descriptive names. So there are a whole lot of considerations to look out for when building products, software products, or software applications with accessibility in mind. So for tables, there are some. I actually added resources where I shared like a descriptive, implicit best practice on how to actually use tables and ensure that people can actually people with several impairments, or everyone basically building for all in terms of how to use table descriptively. So I talked about form. If you look at the screen, so you have two different, so there are two different input field session. Yeah, so for considering high cognitive load on memory, the first one, that's this one here, is actually not it's a no, don't do this. So this is actually best practice. So assuming a user wants to input something and the input is not correct, it tells the user, although this is not descriptive enough, it's just to show what basically where to place your error messages to your users when there's a scenario as such. So after building products or software applications, how do you know if it's actually accessible? So these are a list of sites you could use to check if your product or your website or whatever you're building, your mobile app, your website, your about page, whatever it is, your blog, if it's accessible. So these are a list of tools you can use to check if they are actually accessible. So the role or the obligation of actually ensuring that your application is accessible on the developer program. So I'm assuming you have a full product team or a full engineering team. It's actually the responsibility of everybody to ensure that the product or the software application can be used by everybody as much as possible with ease. Keyword is ease. So from your first iteration, your second iteration, whatever process of software development you're using, in waterfall methodology you're using, it's best to ensure that you incorporate checks to ensure that it's accessible by everyone. So you're building a mobile apps, please make it accessible. If your application is used on tablets, of course, you have to also consider responsiveness. Is it accessible? If it's a web app, please make it accessible. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for your talk. Accessibility is so important. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat so Sarah can answer them.
Yeah, you can ask me.
If you
can ask me a question.
Yes, you can ask Sarah any question you want, and also you can find her here on Hopin and message her directly if you need to reach out to her later. And also this talk is being recorded, so it will be uploaded on YouTube if you would like to rewatch it later. And there's one question, Sarah. Do you have any resources that we could check for accessibility for websites? To check accessibility for websites.
Yeah, I think I shared a few. Yeah, so on the Mozilla developer website, you could check. There are a lot of resources on there that you can check. So if you want to check if your website is accessible, you use A1 compliance platform, accessibility checklist, accessibility developer tools. So even on your console. You can check if you're, in terms of, so considering colors, your color contrast, you can check if it actually meets accessibility requirements. Yes. So Bash, these are a list of tools you can use. Or if you want resources, if you go on the Mozilla Dev website here, I have the link here. You have lots of resources on there.
Awesome. I hope you got your answer. If there are any more questions, please leave them in the chat. I would like to thank everyone for joining Sarah's talk.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you, Sarah. And great. Okay, great. Awesome. So if there aren't any more questions, there are some awesome talks also that are happening after this session that you could check them out. Let me share my screen here for a bit. Okay. So here you can check also the other talks that will be occurring in a little bit. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you again, Sarah, for your talk.
Thank you.